Good morning, everyone, from Dunrobin Ranch in Lolo, Montana. We're having a rainy, cool day today. Actually, it's a bit of a relief for everybody around here. And with me again today, I have Camille from Beyonder. Hello, Camille. How are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
I'm very good. And you are going to be connecting with Inez in Cascais. Is that correct? Did I say it correctly?
Yep.
Portugal. I'm very excited. I've never been to Portugal. I love the Mediterranean climate, and I do have some background with the Spanish language, but not the Portuguese. So I'm very excited to hear about your country.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. Thank you, Camille. Very, very happy to be with all of you today. So my name is Inês, as Suzanne was saying, and I was born and raised here in Portugal. I'm actually from the city of Lisbon. The city of Lisbon is the capital of Portugal, and it's about half an hour drive from the place where I am, Cascais. Kashkaish is a coastal city that started out as a fisherman's village, and I'm very excited to show it to you today and to share its history with you. But do feel free to ask questions, to send Suzanne some questions. I will be regularly asking if there are questions along the way, so that you can enjoy this walk as much as I will. Ready?
Ready.
Perfect.
I already noticed you're on cobblestones.
Yes.
It's cobblestones, right?
I am. So I'm going to show you the road where I am. I'm actually by a very interesting house over here. I will show you the facade in just a couple of minutes. But in the meantime, I would like to show you where I am. I am right by a bridge of cobblestones. This bridge is located by this beautiful palace called Condes Castro Guimarães. Long, difficult name. So it was actually named after the counts that owned it. But let me take you a little bit further back in time. Kashkaish as a town started out back during the Roman occupation. So 2,000 years ago, this area, not too far from Lisbon, was already inhabited. We are right by the coast, west of Lisbon, and this area back then was called Cascais. Cascais in Latin means pieces of shells, pieces of the shells of the crustaceans or of seashells, and that's the origin of the name of the town. However, 2,000 years ago, this beautiful palace did not exist. This one in front of us was actually built in 1897 to 1900. The initial part of it was the tower that you have on the left-hand side of the image. It was built and owned by a gentleman of Irish ascent. He was called George O'Neill. George O'Neill also owned the property and ordered the property on the other side of the road to be built also. However, he actually ended up selling both properties. The one in front of us was inherited or actually bought by two counts. And when they purchased this property, unfortunately, they did not have any children, and they ended up leaving the property to the municipality of Cascais, which is the town we are at. So it was actually open to the public in the 1930s. The gentleman passed away in 1927, and he had already given orders to leave this to the municipality. So the whole park around it is a public park. Families from all the areas around Cascais come for the Sundays, for the Saturdays, the late afternoons, and this is now a museum for decorative arts. So a lot of the furniture, painting, ceramics inside can be seen during a visit. And if I move the camera a little bit further down, you can see there's a dog. You can see there are children, people playing. Well, they actually used to have access to this beach. There's a staircase that you can see over here. Nowadays, this is also a public beach, and a lot of the locals come here when they have some free time because it's not too far. Now, we are in a town that, even though it started off as fishing town, that actually changed a lot during the 19th and 20th centuries. And why? Guess why? The royal family started spending their summers here. And, you know, why not? When you see this beauty, you understand why not, right? So the water that we can see here is the one that goes under the bridge to the area that we were just seeing. I'm just going to move a little bit further so that you can see the house of Santa Maria, Saint Mary, or Virgin Mary. This house was also built by George O'Neill. This house ended up being in the hands of 3 different owners along the past 100 years. It was also built in the early 1900s. And back in 2004, so 17 years ago, it was purchased by the municipality and is also a museum nowadays that can also be visited, as well as the beautiful lighthouse that you can see in the background. So the lighthouse, I'm going to zoom it in for you to see better. This beautiful lighthouse was built in 1868. It's still a working lighthouse, so it became automated. It's now automated already since the 1980s. Sorry, I get excited talking and then I lack air. So, as I was saying, you can see the lighthouse just at a distance. It's also possible to visit it nowadays. And there's even a nearby hotel that we call the Hotel of the Lighthouse, which is behind the lighthouse to the right-hand side. So as you can understand, the sea and Kashkaish have always been connected. So taking you back to the Roman times, but at the same time, leaving this beautiful area that we are now seeing, I would like to know if so far there are any questions about this amazing view and about what we've spoken so far.
Well, I've been looking at a map of the area, and it seems to be that you're right at the opening of a very large bay that leads into Lisbon. Is that correct? Is this the beginning?
Yes. Yeah, we have the bay to our left-hand side, which is where we are heading to now. And that whole bay goes all the way to Lisbon. So there's a coast of about 35 kilometers, a 40-minute drive if we do it along the coast, all the way into the city of Lisbon. Yes. And as it is turned towards south, we are here turned towards south, we actually don't have all of the winds coming from northwest and all of the currents that hit the coast at about a 20-minute drive from here to our right-hand side. Basically, the coast does a curve in this direction, and then a big part of the coast nearby is actually facing northwest. And that area has the water with a lot of waves. It's good for surfing, but it's also more difficult for us to actually enjoy the beach in that area. So Cascais has always been very important precisely because it offered safety conditions for navigation, to actually have a port, to have a fishing industry for a very long time. And that's what made Kashkaish so rich along the centuries. And for people to actually come here, they did have to have living conditions by comparison with the nearby coast. And of course, it also had an importance at a defensive level because it was right close to Lisbon. And so we did have fortresses along the centuries. We're going to see one of them very soon. So that allowed to provide one more defensive location along the coast right near Lisbon.
So,
did I answer your question, Suzanne?
yes, I'm trying to think that Portugal was very much a seagoing country.
Yes. It was. In fact, as a country, Portugal is born in the 12th century as a kingdom. Back then, as a kingdom. Nowadays, we have a parliament. Nowadays, we do not have a monarchy. We do have a parliamentary democracy, but we did have a kingdom that was born in the 12th century, and right next to us there were other kingdoms such as Castile and Leon, and those kingdoms one day will unify into one very big kingdom called Spain, but that only happens in the 15th century. So in the meantime, Portugal was shaping its territory, and by the early 1400s, Portugal did start what we call the Maritime Explorations. If you think of it, right next to tiny Portugal, we did have those very big kingdoms right next to us, the ones that will unify into Spain. We couldn't really expand our territory into the mainland, so we actually expanded the territory by colonizing other territories. And that happens from 1415 on. Along the whole 15th and 16th centuries, the Portuguese will be seafarers, will explore a big part of the coast of Africa, arrived to India in 1498, and later also to China, to Japan, even to Timor, and also to Brazil. So imagine that. We will be definitely an important port. And that will affect the history of Kashkaish. How? Now, just ahead of us, you can see that there is a fortress, and you can see there's a modern construction inside it. That's a pool, just up there, and it's a hotel, but it's inside a fortress that dates back to the 1600s. Why would we have a fortress here in the 1600s? I would love to show you a picture of Cascais back in 1530. So I'm going to share a picture that I have right here for you to be able to have a notion of how big or small Kashkaish was back in 1530. And I'll just keep walking towards the fortress. So you can see we are right now on the left tip of the territory here. So right now we are where there's a small fortress with a tower on the left-hand side of the image. That was the fortress of St. Anthony, the Tower of St. Anthony, to be more precise, which had been built in 1488. You can see some ships right in the middle of the image, and you can see that Cascais was actually surrounded by a wall. And back then there were about 46 houses inside the wall, 26 outside of the wall, and of course the city was expanding. At this point, we have about between 600 to 1,000 inhabitants in Kashkaish, putting together the inhabitants that lived inside and outside. And within the region, so the town and its surroundings, we had about 3,000 inhabitants. And what you can see in the back is that there are mountains. Now, not too far from here, if you look at a map on Google Maps, we have a town, I'm going to stop sharing, but we have a town called Sintra. And Sintra is just north of Cascais. It's a mountain, and all of that area between the two towns was a very fertile area, very fertile grounds. And what does that mean? That means that a lot of the goods that were produced in that area were exported to other areas of the country, namely to Lisbon, via Cascais, because there were no trains, there were no planes, and so the easier way to get the products into Lisbon, for example, or to other parts of the country along the coast was to get the very good products from the Sintra region right into Cascais. It's not too far, and to navigate them into other sections of the country. And of course, you think, well, that must have made Kashkaish very rich. In that case, what did Kashkaish live off? Of course, Kashkaish right here, as you could see on the image, was close to the water. So of course there was a fishing activity. But a lot of people were afraid of living on the coast because sometimes there were pirate attacks. And this justifies and explains why a big part of the population actually lived in the countryside of Cascais, between Cascais and Sintra. And with time, and in the 14 and 1500s, Portugal gained more notoriety. It became more, much bigger in terms of naval power, and a lot of the inhabitants will start coming to the coast. Why? To work as navigators, as fishermen, as people related to activities that are now being relatively better paid. But this also means that as the maritime explorations develop even more, there will be a lot of people leaving from Kashkaish to Lisbon, and the number of inhabitants in Kashkaish will start to get a little bit lower. Now, right here in front of us, we have the cultural center of Kashkaish. It usually houses a lot of modern and contemporary art exhibitions. Also, not too far from here in this direction of this beautiful roundabout with the flowers, in that direction we have two more museums. One is dedicated to the maritime history of Cascais. The other one is dedicated to Paula Rigo work. Paula Rigo, she is a Portuguese painter, still alive. She's a painter whose works, and she's still alive, imagine one day, in 20, 30 years, when unfortunately life takes us at some point. But there are works of hers being sold right now for 1.5 million euros, 2 million euros. So imagine that for an artist that is still producing art in our days. So how does the fortress that I was showing you just here on the right hand side come into the story and is related to the image that you could see? Because as Portugal starts getting wealthier with the maritime exploration, starts bringing products from the New World, ivory, gold, different spices, that also means that there will be more pirate attacks along the coast. And so that means that our power of defense has to grow. And that also means that the image that you saw, there was a fortress, an actual wall surrounding the town. Let me show you where that was located. That was located roughly around the area that we can see now in front of us. And then just a little bit further out on that cape that you could see in the image of 1530, there was a tower, and there was in this direction. But that 1488 tower was not enough. So by the 1500s, we end up building a bigger fortress, and in the 1600s, we'd end up building an even bigger fortress, which is the one that we can see nowadays in front of us, and that was decisive for the defense of the town of Kashkaish. Suzanne,
Yes.
more questions? Yes.
Yeah, I do have a question, and that is, you're right at the mouth of, Portugal really could control that part of the coast as it goes into the Mediterranean, could it not? I mean, it could control potentially the route into the Mediterranean Sea. So I'm curious, where was Portugal in World War II? What was Portugal's role in World War II?
So, answering your first question, the city of Lisbon in particular is further north from the Algarve. So the country is like a long rectangle, and Lisbon and Cascais are located halfway down through the rectangle. So we are still quite far from the Mediterranean. We have a region region in the south of Portugal that we call Algarve, which is the southernmost area of continental Portugal, which is still on the ocean, but certainly closer to Gibraltar. Indeed, that area has even warmer water because it's only some hundreds of kilometers away from the Mediterranean. That area actually has warmer water, so that's why most Portuguese head down to the Algarve in the summer, because the water for us to swim is much warmer there than, for example, here. The water just in front of us should be at a temperature of about 20 Celsius, so about 70, 72 Fahrenheit, while in the south, in the Algarve, it can get to 25, 26, and that would be 80s. So 80, 82, 84 Fahrenheit, which is much warmer. So we could not have a role here in Lisbon regarding the entrance into the Mediterranean. And passing to the second question, the role of Portugal, and that is very related to Cascais, the role of Portugal during the Second World War is officially neutral, although it's there's so much to do with Second World War here, specifically in Lisbon and Kashkaish, because many of the refugees came to Lisbon and came to Kashkaish, and we're going to go on that topic very, very, very soon. Did I answer your questions?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that.
You're most welcome. Now, in this direction, we are actually facing east. So if we drew a line straight ahead with my finger over there, we would reach Lisbon if we went straight ahead. However, the coast does a curve like that. Then there's like a little tip up here, and then it curves back behind it. So Lisbon is in that direction, half an hour drive from here. Of course, if we go along the coast, it takes a little bit longer. If we take the highway, which runs parallel to the coast, it only takes about half an hour. But going back to the fact that Kashkaish was a fisherman's town, it wasn't only a fisherman's town. At the time of the Romans on this coast, did you know what they produced? I'm going to share a little image with you of what used to be produced back then on this coast. The color purple. Can you imagine that? Producing the color purple in this area. So producing the color purple, sorry about that. Just still looking for the picture. It's called Murex brandaris, and it's a type of, I can't find it, sorry, but it's a type of shell, a seashell. And basically, it is still produced, but in very small quantities in certain parts of Northern Africa, because now there's a synthetic way, a chemical way of producing the color. But back then on this coast, we had the production of the color purple. Basically, they would crush the shells, remove the animal that was inside, salt it, let it dry, and when dried, they could basically turn it into a powder. And you need about, even when it's produced nowadays, about 120 pounds of those seashells to produce 1 gram of the color purple. And that's why the color purple was so expensive back then. And so mostly the wealthy people would wear it, but in very small quantities. And the more you could wear the color purple, it meant that you were even wealthier, that you actually had the power to purchase a bigger quantity of the color to dye your clothings. So just to give you an idea, half a gram would be enough to dye, the sleeve of your shirt. So it's really, really an expensive product. A gram goes up to about $2,700 US dollars. Now, who is this gentleman? Let me introduce you to Carlos. And what does he have to do with Kashkaish? Carlos was a king. a king, but also look at what he's wearing. He's an admiral, and he seems to be looking out into the ocean. Now, when does Kashkaish pass from being a fisherman's town to a town frequented by royalty? Of course, we had the fishing activity, we had the fortresses, very important. In fact, in the 1600s, we had different fortresses and lookouts built along the coast. About 10 were built in the 1640s until the 1680s along all the coast to Lisbon. So imagine that. And of course, defensive, fishing. So the kings start coming here to Cascais by the late 1800s. Who was responsible for that? Maria Pia. Maria Pia was an Italian queen. She was the mother of King Carlos there. And Maria Pia, when she came to Portugal, she had never seen the ocean. I mean, she was Italian. And when she came to Portugal and she saw the ocean for the first time, so beautiful. And she thought, I'd really love a house by the ocean. Who wouldn't, right? Now, what existed here in Cascais was not a palace. There was a fortress, right, from the 1600s, the one in front of us. And she does ask her hubby, Louis, Louis, please, would you build a nice house for us in Cascais? Well, he says, she's quite a spender. For FYI, she's quite a spender. She left beautiful works in Portugal, but she spent a lot of the monarchy's gold. She liked, she likes to present herself well, to decorate, etc. Anyway, he doesn't actually build a full palace. He does build a relatively small, which for our standards is still big, inside the fortress. So this means that Louis and Maria Pia, the Italian queen, and their sons, including Carlos up here, they would spend their summers here. And we're talking about 1870s, 1880s, 1890s. So Carlos grows up as a kid here, speaking to the fishermen, running around, and he loves the ocean so much that he actually becomes the first oceanographer in the country. And that's why we have a museum here in Kashkaish dedicated to the ocean, dedicated to the work of King Carlos. Unfortunately, the same king got shot, and that happened in 1908. There were several movements, as you know, across Europe against the monarchy. So it wasn't anything specifically against this king, but against the institution of monarchy. And I would like to share with you an image of Carlos. In fact, Carlos was quite a loved man here in Kashkaish. Here he is. So you can see him, he's a bit chubby. He's right in the middle of the image with his cigar, with his hat, just in the middle of everyone, both the nobility and the bourgeoisie, but also the population, the commoners. And we're talking about a man that was definitely loved here in Cascais. I mean, he was a kid that grew up spending his summers here. As a king, he wasn't, the most capable king, but he definitely was loved. And when he was shot in Lisbon in 1908, that was a very sad moment. His first son was also shot, and the queen and the second son survived. In 1910, there's a coup, and there's the beginning of the First Republic in Portugal, which will last until 1926, when we have the beginning of a dictatorship that will last until 1974. So our democracy is actually very recent, since 1974. Changing subject. All of these striped little houses, little containers, these are actually a sort of lockers for the fishermen. As you can see, we still have a lot of fishing boats here on the bay. It's still a live activity here in Kashkaish. The fishermen in the morning usually dock down here, and the fish is taken inside the building that we have here to this area here. It's counted, and the offices for the Port of Kashkaish are inside this building. So that's where they register quantities, prices, everything. And the beach that you have down here was one of the many beaches that we have along the coast, and that was frequented by the royalty. Now, I would like to know, before we walk down to explore the rest of the town, if there are questions about the topics we have spoken about so far.
I'm fascinated by your explanation of the color purple, because it is indeed associated with royalty. You talk about, things that are still Royal Crown whiskey comes in a purple bag. You still have that association of purple with royalty and wealth. So I never understood that. I really appreciate your telling us that story.
Thank you, Suzanne. We're always learning, and it's fantastic because the more I read and prepare the tours, everything I read, I just find more topics that I want to go search about and read about. And this one is actually one that I learned more relatively recently. So thank you for your comment. Now you can probably hear that it's a little bit windy. One of the good things about these tours is that they are live. One of the disadvantages is that, everything happens live, so we have no control over wind, over sun, over rain, but I hope you can hear me relatively well. And if you can't at some point, just let me know and I will repeat what I just said. I would like to drive your attention to this section right here. This is not Kashkaish anymore. It's still part of the municipality, but it's another town, and it's called Estoril. Estoril was already mentioned in the 1200s for a reason. This region was known back then for the raising of animals, goshawks, for hunting. And these goshawks, in Latin, their name is Asturil. Asturil. And Asturil is probably the origin of the name Estoril that we have for that section, for that town right next to Cascais. That town was very known more recently for two things: an ophidrome that you may have heard about, races, Formula One, during the 20th century, but also the fact that there was and there is a very famous casino in Estoril. So when does the life here change? The kings come here, 1880s, 1890s, early 1900s, 1910, the end of monarchy. What happens to Kashkaish? Well, the Republic starts, and there are some ideas. Oh, let's build a casino. Let's make the coast near Lisbon become a sort of Côte d'Azur, known and beautiful, and welcome tourists, both Portuguese and foreign. Well, the project starts to build a casino. It's interrupted because, First World War happens. Portugal got involved. We're going to talk about the second one in just a bit. But during the First World War, Portugal got involved, so there was no money and attention to be drawn into that. It will only be in the 1920s that in Estoril will be born a casino. And why is that important? Because that casino, during the Second World War, which is when Portugal is a neutral territory, the casino in Estoril, this town over here, is going to be the original casino, which does not exist anymore. Nowadays, we have a second one. The original casino where Ian Fleming, at the service of the British Secret Services, was. And he lived that ambience of spying that there was here during the Second World War. This was a neutral territory, but there were British Secret Services, there were the German services, and so he lived that ambience, and he got the inspiration in a spy that was called Duško Popov to create his character of 007, James Bond. So if you Google for Duško Popov, Dusko, Popov, Popov, you can check out how good looking he was. The first book by Ian Fleming was indeed Casino Royale, because he got inspiration for the character right here. Now, as we walk down, you can see the beach is pretty small, but still pretty full. Now, you can imagine that during the Second World War, this was quite a haven for people coming from other territories. Now, Portugal was officially neutral, and that meant that officially it could not welcome refugees, but there was a sort of a hole in the law, intentional or not, that allowed people to seek for refuge here if they had a way to go away. Basically, this was a transition area. This was a place where the people could stay up to 30 days. Initially, it was up to 3 months, but later it was up to 30 days only, and they could only get a visa into Portugal if they could guarantee that they had the means to subsist and that they had a plane ticket or a boat ticket to exit the country. And so many people came to Portugal. Now, the ones that actually were able to exit relatively fast would stay in Lisbon just for some weeks, but many of the ones who didn't, but had to pretend that they had on their way here so that they could be guaranteed asylum, many of them ended up staying in other areas around Lisbon. The ones that were wealthier, of course, came to the area of Estoril and Kashkaish. Now, many of the houses that we have around us are, real estate that is pretty valued. Just to give an idea, this house just in front of us, a few years ago, about 5 years ago, it was for sale, and they were asking about 1.2 million euros. For local standards, that's extremely expensive, even for non-local standards. And it was on sale again last year, as prices in Portugal went up about 40% in the last few years. Probably whoever bought it 5 years ago and resold it last year made a good investment, as you can imagine. Now, as we walk down, let me share with you a curious detail, which is our president of the republic lives here in Kashkaish, and he does come to this beach just like everybody else. And I would like to share with you a couple of pictures that were taken here of the president. Now, these pictures are before COVID, okay? And our president, he's a kisser. And here in Portugal, we have the tradition when we greet someone of kissing twice in the cheek. So one kiss on one cheek and then the other kiss on the other cheek. And he's very known for being, very popular and very social. And of course, nowadays we cannot kiss in the cheeks because of COVID. But I'm going to share a couple of pictures with you of our president that sometimes we can see here at the beach. Let's see where he is. Not sure why the picture didn't load. So let's go. Marcelo is the name of our president. And I'm looking for him. At the beach. He's extremely popular especially amongst the younger, amongst the youngest, and he does love taking selfies. So here we go. Are you still with me? Hello?
We are still with you.
Yes? Okay. Thank you so much, Camille, for your patience too.
Of course. Are you able to share it, or do you want me to share a photo of him?
If you can, I found it. I was getting a little bit desperate.
Oh.
I was pretty sure I had downloaded it. So there he is. Now this time is with the mask and already during COVID, but he's being interviewed, and he's pretty popular. Thank you for your help. Now we're going to continue because I would love to share with you a little bit more about our traditional sidewalk. If you look to the floor, try not to get dizzy. This is the Portuguese traditional sidewalk. Now, we've always used stones for pavements before there was asphalt, but in 1842 in Lisbon, we tried this particular type of paving for the first time. Smaller stones. This is all very hard work that is handmade in the place. And we have waves, we have flowers, we have names of shops. And this is something that you can find throughout the whole country, but especially in Lisbon and its surroundings, therefore in the center of Portugal. Now, I would like to teach you a couple of important words if you do come to Portugal one day. The first one is hola, not hola like in Spanish, but very similar, hola. And for good morning, we say bom dia, bom dia. And we also have a very useful word, which is thank you, which if you are a lady, you say obrigada. If you are a gentleman, you say obrigado. So it does not depend on who you are speaking to, but who you are. Who is speaking? Obrigado if you're a man, obrigada if you are a woman. No gracias. We do speak some Spanish. We start learning it at school around high school, but we do learn English since the age of 10, and we are way more fluent in English than we are in Spanish. So of course, if you can speak some Spanish, it is very welcome here. But we are not, it's not as easy for us to speak Spanish as English, which sounds quite strange, right? Because the language is much closer to ours. But as we are not learning it since young, we are not as fluent in it. Why did I stop here? To introduce you to Pedro. Hi, Pedro. So Pedro was a king, and he's the one that in 1364 gives the first charter to Kashkaish. And this is extremely important because the charter was basically a document that provided a certain level of independence to Cascais. Cascais used to be part of the administration area of Sintra, which is another town north of here, in the mountains, a very frequented area by the kings along the Middle Ages until, of course, the 19th century. And he gave the first charter to Cascais in the 1600s, so 300 years later, we actually have the city hall that is built right here where we are. We can actually see the beautiful tiles depicting saints just on the upper area. So those colorful panels are actually made of tiles. Nowadays, we have a museum of the town inside the building. Part of the offices are in the back. Other offices are in other buildings. And I would just like to remind you that by the late 19th century, it was not yet a habit in Portugal to go to the beach. It did become because of Maria Pia. And going to the beach was going, with a lot of clothing on, those really big swimsuits. It was mostly for health reasons. So you actually could be prescribed by your doctor X number of minutes inside the water, X minutes in the sun. So the benefits of being close to the water were studied and were also very spoken about at this point. Another thing is that nearby Kashkaish in Estoril, there were thermal waters. Those thermal waters actually came out of the earth with a temperature of 35 Celsius. Now, 35 Celsius is about 100 Fahrenheit. That's really nice. That's really warm. And so, of course, both Cascais and Estoril, the nearby town, kind of grew together as a destination, especially in the late 19th, early 20th century. Now, what can we see around us? We are walking in the area just behind the big hotel that we walked by. We do have a lot of restaurants, clothing shops, also grocery shops. So this is, of course, a destination, a summer destination for seafood, for of course, a bit of souvenir shopping. For example, right here we have the famous cork. You may have heard about cork. Cork is a bark that we extract from a tree, the cork tree, the cork oak, and we extract this bark that we can use to make bottle stoppers, but also to make the objects that you can see right here. It's a relatively expensive product, but a high quality product. Portuguese wear it, I wear it. It's not just a touristy thing. It's actually a product that we are very proud of. My wallet, for example, is made of cork. We do not kill the cork oaks, okay? We extract dead bark. So the tree grows a bark that at some point, as it is protecting the trunk, it will die because the trunk wants to keep expanding, growing, and the bark cannot cope with the growth of the trunk. So that bark dies and regenerates basically a new layer of bark will grow. So we basically take the outer bark from the tree, and the tree grows a new bark. So it's a tree that can live up to about 200 years. Can you believe that? 200 years. Now, are there any questions so far? Let me just show you a menu for you to have an idea of the prices here. So this is all in Portuguese. Alheira is a sausage. Now, this sausage comes with rice and fries, but this sausage, curiously enough, is actually a sausage of Jewish origin. And you wonder, how come? Why did Jewish eat sausages if mostly the sausages were made with pork? Well, they weren't. In the case of this sausage, it was invented by the Jewish families in Portugal that were hiding after the official expulsion back in the in the late 1400s, in 1496 to be more precise. They created sausages filled with, for example, rabbit meat, different birds' meat like chicken, and they would basically make these sausages to pretend that they were actually eating real sausages. Can you believe that? That was quite smart. Very, very smart. And then right here you have francesinha. It's a sandwich with lots of cheese on top, and then a hot sauce made with beer and alcohol and tomato sauce. It's really, really yummy. Oh, now I'm getting hungry. And then this one is one of my favorites, rice with octopus, roast beef, steak, salad, salmon salad. So these are more common things to find. But these are the prices for one portion for one person. Cost of living in Portugal is lower than in other parts of, especially Central and Northern Europe. But of course, salaries also tend to be lower. The minimum wage per month is of 700 euros per month. And of course, in the bigger cities, Lisbon, Porto, the average salary tends to be higher, but also the cost of living tends to be higher. Renting an apartment in Lisbon, a one-bedroom, can cost a minimum of 700 euros going up. questions so far?
People are very interested in the history, Inez. Yeah,
Sure.
one of the things about the United States, as you well know, is our history is not nearly as deep, as long as European history. So a lot of people are very interested in what you are telling us with respect to Portugal's relationship to its neighbors, like Spain, etc.
Ah, yes, sure. Would you like to know more about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's
Perfect.
explained that you have. The other thing is we don't understand very well is the whole royal system. So Portugal
Sure.
was started by a particular king. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. Let's go back in time. And as we walk in this beautiful street ahead of us, let me give a little bit more information about it. So imagine the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal, Spain. It's a relatively small peninsula. 2,000 years ago, the peninsula was not divided by these two territories. 2,000 years ago, the whole territory was invaded and occupied by the Romans. They brought the language, Latin. Of course, there were already people here. There were already inhabitants here. So Latin will not evolve in the same way in the different regions of the Iberian Peninsula. It will get introduced, and it will evolve and change and be learned in different ways by the different locals. And so already back then, in the first centuries, we start having different languages that one day will be Castilian and Portuguese and Galician. They're basically, let's say, Latin is the grandma, and nowadays we're speaking the grandchildren of Latin. Let's put it this way. And that was way before Portugal and Spain were kingdoms. After the Romans come the barbarians, Suevi, Visigoths from Central Europe, who will also, by the 5th and 6th centuries, introduce different languages, different habits. They will convert to Christianity to better adapt to the territory that was once Christian under the late time of the Roman occupation. And it's in this context that in 711, we will have the Muslims coming into the Iberian Peninsula. There's a conflict between the different relatives, the different Visigoth relatives, and a family dispute will make one of these Christian relatives call for help from the north of Africa. And that's how the Muslims come into the territory. It's not actually their idea. It's not like, oh, what an excellent sunny day to go and invade the Iberian Peninsula. No, they were actually called in. Of course, when they get here, what they find is good land, good fertile grounds, good water supply in some of the areas of the peninsula. They take over, and of course, our languages will also undergo the influence of the Muslim presence. So we will have a lot of words that actually come from the Arabic. And at this point, where did the Christians go? If the Muslims came from south and took over the south and center of the peninsula, most of the Christian elites, and I'm talking military elites, nobility, they will search for refuge in the north of the Iberian Peninsula. And so if you think of the north, that's basically the resistance area, and that's where a lot of the resistance will start conquering land, fighting for the land towards south. Initially, they are very friends with each other. So, yes, we're all together, united against the enemies in the south. But as they gain more land, as they gain more territory, we are humans, right? And as humans, they will fight. And they will start enlarging the territories, but also they will start fighting for those territories and subdividing into little kingdoms such as Galicia, Castile, Leon, Aragon. Nowadays, those names are regions of Spain. But back then, they were independent kingdoms from each other mostly. And it's in that context of reconquest along the 9th, 10th, 11th centuries. It's finally in the 12th century that little Portugal is born not out of Spain, but out of Castile and Leon, which was one of those many kingdoms. So Portugal, when it's born, it's not even as big as it is nowadays. It was a tiny portion of the country nowadays. The top part, the north part of the territory of Portugal was back then the full territory. And slowly the Portuguese made the conquest towards south, shaping the little rectangle that you can see nowadays on maps. And right next to us, all the other kingdoms did the same. They shaped their lands, conquering towards south against the Muslims. But only in the 15th century, as they were much bigger, they managed to actually make alliances good enough and stable enough to unify our country, our neighbor country, Spain, while Portugal was already, an independent country since the 1100s. Also, of course, making its way south, but of course, still a very old country compared to our neighbor Spain. What happens in the 1500s? We have a stable, unified Spain that tries to take over Portugal. In 1580, they are successful, and from 1580 to 1640, Spain governs Portugal. So we have the same king for the two territories. In 1640, we have a revolution. We get rid of the Spanish occupation, and we regain our independence until nowadays. Back then, the countries were ruled by kings, and when Portugal became independent in the 1100s, someone was proclaimed king. So basically, a count was proclaimed king. If the country basically gets independence, someone has to fight and be strong enough to affirm the power and the land and to be able to fight for its independence. So he self-proclaims king, and later on the Pope approves that self-proclamation in the 1100s. And so we have kings until 1910, but our neighbor Spain still has kings, as you know. I hope to have summed it up well.
Very interesting, and people are commenting about the sidewalks. Are they everywhere, these waving sidewalks? And the other thing that we noticed is there were no cars on those streets, those narrow. So
Yes.
is that true of most of Portugal, where the narrow streets are now pedestrians only?
So answering the first question, we do have this kind of wavy pattern a little bit everywhere. It's not the only pattern, but we do have it mostly here in Lisbon and surroundings. We do have this type of paving also in the south and in the north, but it's not as frequent. Why? Because for this type of paving, we use limestone, and limestone is very abundant in the north, in the center of Portugal. So if you see here, we do have other types of drawings, but in the north, the more abundant rock is granite, and in the south, the more abundant rock would be marble. So that's why mostly in the center of Portugal, we find this type of sidewalks. Regarding the streets, yes, the tendency right now is for old historical centers throughout Portugal, many of the streets are becoming pedestrians if they are not already. So we do have cars that can drive around the areas that have parking lots. We're creating a lot of parking lots, but the tendency for it to become pedestrian is very big. And also in Lisbon, we are building a lot of bike lanes. So it's becoming more common in the capital to be driving your bike, basically cycling to work, cycling to go home, everywhere. This beach in front of us is called the Beach of the Queen, and it was the favorite beach of Maria Pia, the queen, the mother of the king that we saw earlier. We actually, during our tour, we were there. That's the area of the fortress where we found the statue of the king and where there was a palace right there. There's a marina too. The marina. Yes.
This was really great. We really appreciated all of the history. Let me ask you, first of all, what time is it? In what time is it? Dinner time?
Excellent question. It's 4 p.m. local time. Our dinner time is usually 8 p.m. Lunchtime around 1 and dinner time around 8. We don't eat as late as the Spanish, certainly later than in the US, but not as late as the Spanish. We just have regular times, like the French and others, 1 p.m. for lunch and 8 p.m. for dinner. This is snack time, beer time.
This is the heat of the day. This is a really nice part of the day for you.
Yes, it is. A lot of the people are at the beach because it's August, and a lot of people are on holidays. So it's definitely a really nice part of the day.
Well, people have really enjoyed this, Inez. I want to thank you for a great tour. And you've really opened up people's interest in Portugal. I find that oftentimes, you don't read something before you visit it. You read it after. You look into things afterwards, and I think you prompted a lot of interest. I'm going to go back to something that you said about the community where there was racing, and you said at the very beginning that they were racing goshawks.
Yes, raising goshawks. Yes.
Right. So I assume
for hunting.
Yes, and our community is very interested in birds, and our goshawks very prominent in this part of Portugal. You have a lot of goshawks.
Nowadays, unfortunately, not. We used to have. There are a lot of birds, but also other species that unfortunately got lower numbers, precisely because of urbanization, the expansion, very big expansion of urban areas. For example, in Sintra, the mountain north of Kashkaish, we used to have, for example, bears. Bears got extinct. Grizzly bears got extinct in the 19th century. We used to have a lot of deer, wild boars. We still have some, but in a natural reserve north of Sintra. But the urban expansion, unfortunately, led to drastic diminishing of the numbers. Where we do still have a lot of goshawks is in the Azores. In fact, even if the word for the goshawk in Latin was asturil, it evolved in Portuguese to the word asur. So when the Portuguese got to the Azores in 1427, they actually have mistaken buzzards for goshawks, and they called the islands basically goshawks. Such that's the name of the islands, of that group of islands, still Portuguese in the middle of the Atlantic. In case you have the chance to go one day, it's just paradise of volcanic islands in the middle of the Atlantic. But the name of Açores means goshawks, even if there were more buzzards than goshawks, which is quite interesting. There you can find a lot of nature, a lot of birds. We do a lot of bird watching, not much here in Kashkaish, but just where we have Lisbon, there's a river, and just in that area of the mouth of the river, we have even flamingos, we have other birds. So there's a lot of bird watching in that area, and also south towards the Algarve, Alentejo region and the Algarve region.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Most welcome.
Yeah, we're all interested in birds of prey here, and so goshawks are of a particular interest to us. Well, Inez and Camille, I really want to thank you for wonderful work. It's been great. I think we've had some audio issues going on here. I'm not exactly where they're coming from, but we really enjoyed this a great deal, and we wish you the very best.
Thank you so much. And as we definitely enjoyed Kashkaish, it's one of my favorite locations that you do. So I enjoyed it.
Thank you, Camille. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Camille. Thank you to all who have watched. And who knows, one day in in Lisbon. But until then, we keep having a lot of virtual tours, not only here, but in Lisbon and in other destinations across the world. So it would be a pleasure for Beyonder to have you for other destinations.
Yeah, well, we've been enjoying this very much. Thank you very much.
Have a great day, everyone.
Okay, and with that, we're going to say goodbye to our audience. Thank you all for joining us. I know you enjoyed this, lots of good comments, and we'll see you again.